My name is Sal, which means Salvatore, and I am a native of Italy. My parents immigrated to the United Kingdom in the late 1960s. Our family ran a popular Italian restaurant, which served as a support not only for my closest relatives but also for our distant relatives, including numerous cousins. Although we may not live in each other's pockets as in the past, we remain a close-knit family. We try to gather for family events because no one wants to face the disapproving gaze of our beloved grandmother, the matriarch of our clan, Connie, who always demanded obedience. Connie became my wife 7 years ago. We were both about 30 years old when we decided to get married. We met after finding ourselves in a relationship that had no direction and, although satisfying in some aspects, did not contain those elements necessary for long-term commitments. For almost 2 years, we enjoyed each other's company, participated in parties, and had a great time before finally deciding to step forward and exchange vows. Unfortunately, my grandmother was never able to fully accept Connie, limiting herself to a tolerant attitude toward her presence. She had never been openly rude to Connie, but there was always a look of disbelief in her eyes, as if she expected Connie to do something wrong. Where do women get such intuition or perception? It remains a mystery to me. Sometimes she had a hard time hiding her emotions from my wife, although she never expressed her opinion in front of others. Shortly before we entered into a marriage alliance, she warned me, "Keep an eye on her, there's something about her that bothers me. Be careful and take care of your heart." These words, for unknown reasons, continued to sound in my head as a constant background. About a month ago, I found out that my wife was secretly dating another man. As I found out, they met regularly about once every 2 weeks for at least 6 months. The truth about this turned out after a thorough investigation on my part. Surprisingly, finding out the truth wasn't as difficult as I expected. One evening, a small oversight on her part made me suspect that something was wrong. It all started with a minor detail, a pen, a cheap ordinary pen usually given as a souvenir at a hotel. Her sudden appearance puzzled me, as I couldn't remember ever staying at the hotel from where she picked up the pen. I usually prefer to stay in well-known hotel chains when I travel, and this usually happens about once a month, although I am accumulating loyalty points, but they are not so great. One evening, walking with Connie, I needed a pen. She rummaged in her big purse and pulled out a pen for me. But as soon as I finished writing, I noticed an inscription on the handle which caused me a small alarm. I knew that I had not stayed at the hotel indicated on the handle, and I could not think of why my wife should have a pen from this particular hotel. Naturally, this led me to be perplexed. Without saying a word, I handed the pen back to Connie. I didn't say anything, but my instinct told me that I needed to delve deeper into the situation and find out if there was cause for concern. This small crack in our marriage, although it seemed insignificant and trivial, could eventually turn into a number of consequences. Oddly enough, I chose to push her aside and not think about it because we were going to meet with our friends to spend a delightful evening over dinner, drinking, and dancing, the usual rendezvous with 2 other couples. We found ourselves in the cozy lounge bar of our favorite restaurant just at the moment when the notorious pen made its solemn move. It was our favorite place where we always felt comfortable and could enjoy a relaxed atmosphere. In addition, the owner of the restaurant was one of my cousins, which means we were entitled to a generous family discount. Of course, we reciprocated by expressing our support for the institution. Discounts allowed us to find the perfect balance between expressing gratitude and not undermining the authority of the owner. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement that worked harmoniously. The other couples present that evening were Carlo and his wife Joanna, also Phil and Terry. Carlo and Joanna were a little older than us, about 5 years. Despite our distant relationship, we still considered ourselves a family. Carlo was distinguished by a somewhat old-fashioned behavior, and his life was quite interesting, although not quite within the law. He had a formidable personality, and I still remember how he initially scared Connie when they first met. But underneath that intimidating exterior was an incredibly kind and gentle person. You can't think of a better person to meet unless you manage to upset him. Just one piece of advice: don't. Carlo was like an older brother to me, always ready to support me. Carlo was a reliable companion who always knew how to keep me out of trouble and easily coped with the problems that arose. His wife, Joanna, was a charming woman who shared a deep love with Carlo, which made them an ideal couple. She was not only beautiful but also the only person who could intimidate Carlo, although he adored her openly and without any doubt. I was lucky enough to get to know Phil through work, and we immediately found a common language. We were the same age and had similar views on life. Sometimes we played golf together, and our friendship went beyond the golf course. Phil's wife, Terry, joined us in the process of chatting at the golf club, and everything seemed to be going well. It was noticeable that Terry and Connie got along well with each other. Often, they spent days in excessive shopping trips, buying everything in a row and spending an eternity on it. All I saw were the huge bags that Connie brought home after such outings. While Phil was unfailingly warm and friendly, Terry sometimes seemed distant, especially lately. But there came a moment when she suddenly took off and completely joined the team. I often suspected that something was wrong with her, and I repeatedly told Connie about it, but she just brushed it off, resorting to the typical excuses about women's problems. When we were sitting in a cozy area enjoying cocktails, Carlo and Joanna came into the room. Rising from my seat, I greeted them warmly with hugs and kisses. Soon, an attentive waiter quickly brought fresh drinks to our table. Connie never stopped being surprised at how well we were taken care of wherever we went. Knowing that there were 6 of us, my cousin quickly directed us to the reserved table. He led us to our usual nook, which provided both privacy and a view of the entrance. Carlo always tried to have this view from the window. Although we were curious, we didn't ask why. Joanna asked Connie about Phil and Terry's arrival, mentioning that she had talked to Connie earlier and was informed that they would indeed arrive, but they might be a little late since Phil was not home yet. Carlo, watching the communication of these 2 women, gave me a meaningful look. In response, I directed my gaze at him, but he barely shook his head, deciding to leave everything as it is for now. I mentally noted that I would discuss this with Carlo later when we finished our first drinks. Phil and Terry finally showed up. Both looked slightly flushed, but there was an additional shade in their behavior. Carlo just watched them, his expression unfathomable. I noticed the familiar look again, and I wondered what Carlo knew. Undoubtedly, something important was happening. We settled into our seats and quickly began discussing work, the upcoming date, and the usual conversations about our families and children. After enjoying a delicious meal, we returned to the lounge area where music was playing. By this point, the girls were already impatient to go to the dance floor and burn the calories. We 3 guys sat for a while, realizing that our duty was to accompany them. Carlo took the initiative and, after the first song, escorted Joanna back to our table. Looking around, I noticed that Phil and Terry were still on the dance floor, but there was awkwardness between them. I asked Connie quietly, "Are they both okay?" She replied, "I think so." Terry didn't talk about anything. I took another look at her and realized that something was definitely wrong. Phil and Terry joined us at the table, but Terry quickly pulled her hand away and said she needed to go to the toilet. Carlo asked casually, "Is everything all right, Phil?" Phil calmly replied, "Yes, it's all right, just maybe a little too much," and raising his glass signaled to pour more. The waiter brought a new batch of drinks before the women returned to the discussion. Terry eased herself into the booth next to Phil. Their true feelings were manifested in nonverbal signals. Connie's gaze met mine, betraying a sense of anxiety, and she quickly looked away. Under the table, Carlo imperceptibly nudged me with his knee, hinting at hidden knowledge. I looked around and caught him winking, confirming that he knew about something important. To relieve the tension, we continued to change partners as usual for a few more dances. But when it was time to leave, I noticed that Connie was talking to Phil at the other end of the hall. This additional feature of the evening did not escape my attention. I thought about asking her about it later, but then I changed my mind. After saying goodbye, we parted in different directions by taxi. Curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist asking about Phil and Terry. "What happened to them?" I asked directly. In response, she smiled and convinced me that everything was fine. But when she looked out the window at the passing lights, I couldn't help feeling that something was wrong. Not understanding what exactly was the matter, I decided to contact Carlo the next morning. That night, Connie tried to distract me with intimacy, reminding me that she loved me. "Please remember that I love you," she whispered. Watching her, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. There was something wrong with her, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Darling, always remember that I love you too. You are my wife, and no one will ever separate us. I will never give you a reason to doubt it, I reassured her, hugging her tightly and showering her face with kisses. After that, we fell asleep, but as I lay there, the unusual events of that evening spun in my head. I realized that I had to contact Carlo first thing in the morning. The next day, Connie got up early and went to the gym for a workout. Wandering aimlessly around the house, I drank glass after glass of refreshing orange juice, trying to clear my clouded mind. Sitting down at my laptop, I began to search for the secret of the name of the hotel engraved on the handle that was in Connie's purse. After a thorough Google search, I found out its location. It was very close, although on the other side of London. Conveniently, the hotel had on-site parking and exuded elegance. Having written down the phone numbers and email address, I couldn't help but pay attention to the convenient function of booking via the internet. Despite my skepticism, I decided to study the history of the hotel for possible clues. Alas, my investigation did not yield anything significant. As I was getting ready to leave, I dialed Carlo's number. Carlo, this is Sal. What's going on with Phil and Terry? I feel like you know something. Should I be worried? I asked. Let's meet at my brother's bar around noon, then I'll tell you all the details. It's better to discuss this in person, not over the phone, Carlo replied. Good, I'll come. No problem, I confirmed. Come alone, okay? Don't bring anyone else, Carlo instructed. Yes, of course, I understand, I replied, and the call ended abruptly. Now anxiety crept into my soul. Was there cause for concern? I felt restless. An hour or so later, Connie came into the room, bouncing briskly and looking rejuvenated. I asked her how her workout went, to which she enthusiastically replied, yes, it was amazing. I really needed it, dear. Then, I said that I was planning to visit Carlo as we had an important conversation with him. At the same time, I added reassuringly, it won't take long. Watching Connie's puzzled look, I couldn't figure out what kind of emotions were behind it. Worried, she asked, what does he want to say? The vibes that I catch from others began to bother me, I explained, taking a deep breath. I got into the car and drove slowly across the city towards Brother Carlo's house. As I reached for the front doorbell, the door suddenly opened, and Carlo was standing next to me. He quickly looked around, as if checking for signs of pursuit. Intrigued, I watched his actions with interest. So, Carlo, what's going on? I asked, meeting his eyes. Without saying a word, he gestured for me to follow him. We walked through the bar, entered a number of utility rooms, and eventually found ourselves in a room resembling a cozy office. Carlo closed the door behind me, and we took seats on opposite sides of a large oak table. I promised your father that I would always protect you, and I intend to fulfill that promise. But what I'm going to tell you now will be difficult to hear, but it's important that you listen, Carlo began, noticing the pain in his eyes. I felt alarmed, and my thoughts ran in circles. Deep down, I knew it had to do with my wife. This man occupied an important place in my life, almost like my father's brother, although he was my cousin. He reached into the top drawer of the desk he was sitting at and took out a large manila envelope. He gently pushed it towards me, his movements were deliberate. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Deep down, I knew that once I opened this envelope, my entire existence would be irrevocably changed. Looking up, I again noticed the suffering reflected in his gaze. Remember that I'm here for you, okay? Carlo's words hung in the air as I carefully extracted the contents of the envelope. Glossy photos unfolded in front of me, depicting a woman and a man engaged in intimacy. Their personalities were unmistakably recognizable. They were frozen in different positions in the walls of a shabby hotel room. And there in the pictures was my wife. This sight struck me like a blow. Are you okay? Carlo's voice broke through the haze of awareness when my marriage was collapsing in front of my eyes. Tears were streaming down my face, and my eyes were fixed on Carlo. A lot of questions were spinning in my head, shock, fear, and anger. How? When? Who is he? My eyes widened, desperate for answers. Carlo stammered, his voice trembling. A few weeks ago, I heard talk about Connie's suspicious actions, but I didn't have concrete evidence until a couple of days ago, before we all went on a date together. I found out a few things. I know some things for sure, but there are still a few loose ends that I'm trying to tie. Okay, as for the method, my friend accidentally saw her in a restaurant and immediately recognized her in South London. He couldn't help but notice the excessive friendliness of the man accompanying her. Such an attitude towards a married woman in public seemed inappropriate. They believed that they were away from prying eyes, feeling safe in their chosen place. The mention of Tony Drew, Phil's brother, caught their attention, implying that he must be familiar to them. When he started talking, I was caught up in the memories of our recent night walk. The exchange of glances between Phil, Connie, and even Terry began to make sense. Everything began to form into a single whole. I saw her pen from one of the hotels in London. Did it happen there? Confirming my suspicions, Carlo nodded. I'm sorry, my friend, but my assistant started monitoring their actions at the beginning of last week. As far as I understand, during the first meeting, you were on an overnight trip. I want to kick his ass, I said. I have been watching him closely, and I'm inclined to meet him face to face, but I must warn you against rash actions that can lead to serious consequences. She's not worth risking your freedom, and neither is he. It will be better if you divorce her and get out of this situation, leaving me to deal with him. No, Carlo. Despite my deepest respect for you, I cannot allow this to happen. I have to personally deal with this issue, and he should know that I also took action. Is he married? Do you have information about his residence, place of work, and other details? I have the information in the envelope that will allow me to answer your questions, but we must act carefully and not make impulsive decisions. It's very important to plan everything carefully to eliminate any possibility of ending up in prison, right? Apparently, the person in question is currently single but has gone through a divorce. Although he has no children, he seems to prefer women, especially those already married. Maybe he doesn't want to commit himself. What do you think about this? How well do you get along with your friend Phil? I'm asking because at the restaurant where Terry and your wife were, he behaved somewhat unusually. I've been watching him closely and suspect that he may be aware of what is happening. If that's true, can we still consider him a friend? I noticed it too, and I'm starting to suspect that his wife is involved in this, judging by their behavior. I don't see any reason to continue being around them any longer than necessary. I think we should end this as soon as possible. If this was an isolated incident, I might not have paid attention to it, but after I saw it, I can't forget about it. It's all too overwhelming. Every time I see her, these images will haunt me. No, I can't forgive or forget. I understand, but in light of the current situation, you should now give priority to your own protection. Taking the time to plan ahead will be helpful, although it may require some patience. Trust me, you're going to need retribution, Carlo. I need to think this through carefully, but I want them both to suffer. Leaning closer, he placed a business card in front of me. A divorced guy. I've already informed him of your situation. Just call him and tell him what needs to be done, and he'll take care of everything. Believe me, he is an experienced specialist and also our cousin. He chuckled at the thought. We had cousins everywhere, and I couldn't help but chuckle. We continued to discuss our plan for another hour until we decided on a plan of action. I dialed Cousin Carl's number. We agreed to postpone its maintenance until all preparations are completed. In the meantime, I had to find out the extent of Phil and his wife Terry's involvement in this situation. Leaving Carlo behind, I drove slowly back home. After parking the car, I went to the door, but when I entered, I didn't find any sound. Connie wasn't there. When I entered the kitchen, I saw a note on the table that read, "I went to Terry." Having understood the meaning of the message, I threw it in the trash. I immediately called Carlo, who was informed that Connie had gone to Terry, so she claimed. But Connie is currently at Phil and Terry's house, although Terry herself is not at home, as I said before. I have a person who is watching her. He'll keep an eye on her for as long as it takes. Okay, so where's Terry? If there's any new information, I'll let you know on my cell phone. I looked at my watch, and 3 hours later, Connie finally came home. Hello, dear, how's your day? She kissed me on the cheek, then headed to the kitchen. It's fine. Carlo wanted to discuss something we were working on, a plan to deal with this, I replied. She looked at me with obvious expectation in her eyes, hoping that I would tell some details, but I deliberately withheld this information, hoping that she would start asking questions herself. A minute passed, and she finally did it. It was about a cousin's personal file, which required permission. He suspected that his wife was mocking him and asking for advice, I said, noticing how her expression changed. I smiled, noting her attempt to maintain a relaxed demeanor. But nevertheless, I assured her that everything would be resolved in the end. She turned away, and the rest of the weekend dragged on slowly. Despite the strong desire, I could not bring myself to make love to her. I couldn't help but look at the photos that Carlo shared with me, where she is captured with Tony. I was surprised how she could continue a relationship with him and still behave completely normally around me. She had an exceptional talent for deception and acting, far surpassing all my ideas. Saturday night passed without any major problems, but on Sunday night, her body language made it clear that she wanted intimacy. I kissed her gently, but the image of her with Tony wouldn't leave my mind, making me doubt that she really could only be mine. It felt like a betrayal. We both lay in bed in silence, lost in our thoughts. As soon as she fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed and went downstairs. I was sitting at my computer, immersed in work, when a message from Carlo caught my attention. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Everything seemed to fall into place and completely coincided with our previous conversations. Feeling confident in my abilities, I came to the conclusion that now it remains only to plan a short trip with an overnight stay on Wednesday, and it will be possible to get down to business. I quickly replied to Carlo's message, confirming my agreement, but sleep did not come, and anger boiled inside. In the morning, after a quick shower, I got dressed and went downstairs. Connie greeted me with a warm smile and served me a delicious breakfast, coffee and toast. She settled into her seat and sipped her coffee delicately. I have to go to Leeds on Wednesday, I said, and her eyes met mine over the rim of her cup. I felt her thoughts stir in her head. In a casual tone, she asked, "You're only going to be gone for one night?" I nodded but added, "I won't be back until late Thursday night." Her gaze became more intense, and she said, "Does this have something to do with Carlo and that cousin you were talking about?" "Nothing serious, but he may need support," I replied. I couldn't help but express my concern about Carlo and said, "He makes me uneasy. I don't know what kind of help he can provide." "You'll be surprised, but I wouldn't want to contradict him. He's so formidable, he knows how to solve problems." Watching her face turn pale, I realized that she was still actively developing a plan in her head. Glancing at my watch, I got up from my seat, signaling that the working day had begun. "It's time for me to leave, my dear. Take care of yourself and behave yourself while I'm gone." Having gone to a scheduled meeting with a lawyer, I discussed various options for an hour and signed the necessary documents. He had already received copies of the contents of the envelopes. After assuring me that everything would be ready to receive on Wednesday afternoon, he confirmed our agreement. I hurried to the bank and transferred all the money from our savings to a new account opened only in my name. In addition, I sent a significant amount to Carlo, asking him to keep it on my behalf. I left the current account untouched as it covered all our bills, and we had practically no extra money left. I emptied our safe deposit box of cash and jewelry and opened a separate account only in my name at another bank. In addition, I decided to deprive her of the allowance that she used to replenish her account. I was sure that these actions would quickly put her in a difficult position, and by the end of the month, she would face problems. Satisfied with the day I spent, I entered my office and went about my usual business. Sadie, my secretary, turned out to be an invaluable assistant, and I couldn't help but admit that she easily copes with all the work, perhaps even more competently than me. During a momentary lull in signing the documents, I noticed that Sadie was looking at me, sighing. I turned my chair around so that I was right in front of her. Our acquaintance lasted almost 5 years, during which she invariably showed the highest professionalism and unwavering devotion, bordering on protection. Although she remained polite and calm in her relationship with Connie, there seemed to be a hidden tension between them, of which I was sure. Connie repeatedly expressed her dissatisfaction, but I always brushed it off, believing that it was related to gender. As I looked at her oval face, her worried dark blue eyes rested on mine. It became clear that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I felt an irresistible desire to confide in someone, and she could sense my inner turmoil. Taking a deep breath, I tried to collect my thoughts and take control of my emotions. "Sadie, there are some circumstances that could lead to disruptions this week if I'm not there. You know what needs to be done to make everything go smoothly." "Of course, boss. You can count on me," she said. "Can I help you with something?" Sadie asked, turning around. She was a refined and intelligent woman of about 40, whom I completely trusted. When I looked at her, it seemed to me that she could decipher my innermost thoughts. "Connie is cheating on me," I confessed. "You're kidding, right?" she replied, clearly taken aback. "My God, this is terrible. Are you absolutely sure? I mean, do you have concrete evidence?" I just nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. Feeling my pain, she hugged me tightly and stood next to me. At that moment, I felt the affection emanating from her, and it became clear to me that it was exactly what was missing in my own home. Tears were streaming down my face for the first time since receiving the terrible news just a few days before. She hugged me tightly, giving me comfort and support until I came to my senses. Gently cupping my face, she looked into my tear-filled eyes. "You're a good person," she reassured me, her voice full of sincerity. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, okay?" With obvious concern, she asked about my future plans. "I'm going to file for divorce and completely break off the relationship," I replied, determination in my voice. Feeling hesitation, I quickly added, "But I don't want to drag you or anyone else into this, Sadie. Please understand me." Worried, she urged me to be careful. "Promise me you won't do anything rash. Please, be careful." The rest of the day dragged on. Every moment seemed like hard work to me. Sadie's devotion to me was priceless. She really was a precious friend. Her husband, whoever he was undoubtedly lucky. She fearlessly protected me from many threats and dealt with them with her usual flair. I heard her push someone away from her with a stern warning to back off, which made me smile. I was pleased to have such kind-hearted people like her by my side. When I got home, I was sitting with Connie, engrossed in watching TV, when the phone rang. She quickly took it into the hallway to answer the call. Although I could hear her speaking softly, the conversation remained unintelligible. After about 5 minutes, she returned to the room. Curious, I asked about the phone call. "Oh, nothing important," Connie replied, a hint of annoyance in her tone. "It's just that Terry, as usual, talked about her complaints, and Phil started another pointless argument." I wished them to find a way to reconcile. Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" Connie didn't say anything. Carefully watching her expression, I searched for any signs that might reveal the truth. "Well," she began hesitantly, "it's not really a serious crisis, rather a small disagreement. I'm sure they'll sort it out." Suddenly, it dawned on me. Is this really what happened when we were in the restaurant? Connie looked at me nervously, not realizing that I had noticed the tension between them and her role in this. While she was spinning a web of lies, it became noticeable that Connie was entangled in her own deception. Despite her obvious discomfort, I couldn't figure out what role Terry and Phil were playing in this situation, unless they were related at all. I remembered how intensely they communicated during our walk. An argument arose between them which was boiling all evening. "So that's what you talked to Phil about?" I asked, trying to figure out if she was trying to mediate in their dispute. Connie's response was restrained and at the same time somewhat frank. "Yes, Terry asked me to talk to Phil, that's all." Intrigued, I continued to extract information. "What was it about, Connie? Perhaps I can provide some help." A smile appeared on my face when I saw my wife begin to struggle with the tangled web of lies. Sensing her anxiety, she calmed me down. "It's all right, S. I'm sure they are already close to solving their problems," she offered optimistically. "Okay, I'm glad to hear that," I replied, relieved at the prospect that my friend's marriage was on the mend. But then a sudden anxiety seized me, and I asked the question, "He's not cheating, is he?" Trying to allay my fears, Connie quickly assured me, No, nothing like that." I was curious, and I couldn't help but ask if Terry was involved in cheating. Sensing my curiosity, Connie said, "Look, I don't know, okay? Let's not mind our own business, let them figure it out for themselves." Fully agreeing, I added, "That's exactly what I was thinking. But maybe when I see Phil, I'll mention it to make sure he's okay." When I looked back at the TV, her eyes narrowed, a clear sign that she had finished discussing this issue. A few minutes passed, and I casually touched on this topic again. "So if none of them are cheating, and Terry asked you to talk to Phil, then what exactly was it about?" I could not resist the insistent question, but Connie abruptly got up from the sofa, clearly agitated, and ran out of the room. I sat and chuckled to myself. By this point, I had gathered enough information, but the role of the other couple was still a mystery. The rest of the evening passed under the sign of mutual avoidance, and we both preferred silence to further discussion. Having decided to deal with the issue of Phil and Terry the next day, I woke up early in the morning on Tuesday. I hurried out of the house just as Connie was coming down the stairs, still looking a little dumbfounded. "I have to move. I have a lot to do before I leave tomorrow," I told her without staying long and headed for the garage. As I moved, my thoughts returned to recent events. Until last week, everything was relatively calm. That's when Connie met Tony, whom she encountered a few months ago during a night out with Terry. They were in a small cozy club with another couple of friends when Tony walked in. Noticing his daughter-in-law, he approached them, smiled affably, and offered to treat everyone to a drink. The girls couldn't help but smile at the handsome man. During that meeting at the club, Terry carefully watched the moment when Tony and Connie locked eyes, feeling some kind of unspoken connection between them. Worried, Terry felt it necessary to warn her friend about Tony's character. "Stay away from Tony. He's not a very gentle person. In the past, he has shown signs of attention to me," she warned, trying to calm Terry down. "Don't worry, Terry. I have my mobile phone with me. Besides, he's quite an attractive and smooth man," Connie calmed her down. Terry had done her duty as a protector, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unsettling behind Connie's eyes. The rest of the evening passed without any notable incidents, at least from Terry's point of view. Despite Terry's warning, Tony managed to lure Connie into a corner and give her his phone number. Over the next few days, Tony somehow got Connie's number and made several calls, involving her in innocent conversations accompanied by light flirting. When the next bachelorette party was approaching, Connie realized that Tony would be attending again. This time, there was dancing, and as soon as Tony took her in his arms, he began to use seduction tactics, showering her with flattery and compliments. He made numerous subtle touches while they were talking. Leaving the club with Terry's worried friend, who scolded her and urged her to end it before something happened, Connie stubbornly kept silent. She brushed off Terry's warnings, insisting that nothing had happened yet. But when Terry saw her with Tony, he just smiled resolutely, continuing to get his way, confident that in the end, he would get Connie. In the following weeks, phone conversations between Connie and Tony became more frequent, and their flirting intensified. Tony began to seriously pursue Connie. The dynamic changed when Terry was unable to join their usual night out, which gave Tony the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was during one of their conversations that he saw a chance to make his move. Using his charm, Tony managed to convince Connie to meet him at the club, emphasizing that it would be a friendly relationship, nothing more. Connie thought about the idea and, seizing on a sudden opportunity, jumped at it with alacrity, perhaps even too hastily, agreeing to the meeting. Unlike her usual outfit for meeting Terry, Connie was adorned with a barely noticeable difference, feeling that this occasion had a special meaning. Excitement bubbled in her veins, overcoming all possible doubts. She couldn't suppress her delight, and she didn't want to. In her opinion, a connection was established between her and Tony through communication, and now she was ready to move to a new level. Without slowing down, she grabbed her purse and headed for the front door, unable to contain her anticipation. That fateful evening was the beginning of a new chapter in Connie and Tony's life. Their bond became stronger and stronger, and meetings became more inevitable. Their evening was riddled with flirting, gentle touches, and playful dancing. Tony took her to his car and drove her to the Marriott Hotel, confident that Connie was ready for the next step. They spent the night together, and their passion lasted until almost 1 o'clock in the morning. When Connie realized the time, panic seized her. She hurriedly cleaned herself up and dressed, urging Tony to take her home. Despite Tony's agreement, the journey alone would have taken at least another 30 minutes. That night was a wake-up call for Connie, and she began to experience trepidation. But in the weeks that followed, she continued to date Tony, unable to resist the temptation of their connection. During my absence, she spent the night with Tony at the hotel, engaging in a variety of intimate activities. Terry advised Connie to stop her actions before she faced the consequences of her behavior. A few weeks later, Terry even discussed the situation with her husband, Phil, hoping that he could influence Tony to stop it before it caused even more damage. Terry explicitly asked Connie to stop and also talk to Tony, enlisting Phil's support. Phil was torn between loyalty to his brother and friend. Over time, it became increasingly difficult to find a solution without causing serious consequences. Connie was well aware that their romance should end soon. She understood that the risk she was taking only increased the attractiveness of continuing their illicit relationship. It was a dangerous game, and if anyone found out the truth, chaos would ensue. The recent incident in the restaurant, combined with the leading questions, indicated that the situation was getting out of control. Connie understood that Tony did not have sincere feelings for her, considering her only as an opportunity. But despite this, she still felt attracted to him. She decided that tomorrow would be the last meeting. She had to put an end to this destructive cycle, but not before the last night together had passed. Now that the decision was made, Connie felt relieved, although she still had to convince Tony to agree. When she entered the room, it was already late. The legal documents received from the lawyer were in her car, ready to be sent by registered mail. Feeling tense, I immediately found solace in my trusty bottle of whiskey. When I looked at Connie, it became clear that she too was struggling with her problems. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, but I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned to her and met her eyes, trying to gauge her reaction. She looked scared and anxious, clearly affected by the events of the past day. "Just a hard day," I muttered, saying that I needed to take a shower to prepare for the upcoming meeting with Carlo. The mention of Carlo seemed to upset her even more, as if it carried a sense of horror. Meanwhile, I stood under the hot jets of water, and tears flowed down my face, mourning the state of my ruined marriage and an uncertain future. Overwhelmed with heartache, the desire to run and hide seized me. After getting out of the shower, I went downstairs, catching Connie's gaze in the kitchen. "What are we having for dinner?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. "I thought we could order takeaway today for a change." "I don't really feel like cooking," Connie suggested. "Sure, no problem," I replied. "Will Chinese cuisine do?" "Yes, that would be great," she agreed. I called and made an order, and while we were waiting for the food to be brought to us, we sat in the living room to the sound of the TV. Dinner passed quietly, almost in suspense. "What time do you have to leave tomorrow morning?" Connie asked casually. "I'll leave around 9 o'clock in the morning. We have a flight booked for 11 o'clock, so there's no need to hurry. But it won't take long because we won't be able to meet the problem until tomorrow evening." "It would be nice to finally meet Cousin Carlo," I said, trying to find a positive aspect in the current situation. "You know how important family is to us." Looking at her, I noticed a note of sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she thought that tomorrow it could all end. The next morning, I woke up to the delicious aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling my nostrils, a smell that I always appreciated at the beginning of the day. While I sipped hot coffee, which seemed to serve as a magical elixir that completely awakened me, Connie was preparing breakfast. I sat down at the table and began to eat toast. My stomach still felt heavy after last night's dinner. Silence enveloped the kitchen while we both enjoyed coffee. A calm atmosphere filled the air. We exchanged fleeting glances but quickly averted our eyes so as not to give ourselves away. The atmosphere was tense, and we both wanted it to be over. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was time to go. "I have to go," I said, and there was urgency in my voice. "I need to pick up Carlo from home." When I passed Connie, she looked at me with a smile on her face. "Have a safe journey and a speedy return," she said. Moving forward, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, and tears welled up in my eyes. With a deep sigh of relief, I turned the steering wheel and drove away from my wife. At that moment, I decided not to look back. I just couldn't. My face was flooded with tears, and my heart was heavy with grief. It was a day of reckoning, the culmination of it all. A few minutes later, Connie picked up the phone and listened to the beeps in her ear. "He's gone," she whispered. "Can you still do it tonight?" The answer was, "Oh yes, baby, of course. Today, we will make this night unforgettable," Connie continued. I had to convince Phil to leave us alone. "He's getting more and more mad at me." "He didn't tell you anything?" The answer was quick, yes, but I told him to mind his own business and not interfere with his wife and me. "She's giving me trouble too, although I know she won't say anything." There was a pause before the last word filled with determination. "Well, none of this is going to stop us, baby." "I'm really looking forward to tonight," she said impatiently. "I asked my friend to book us the same room as last time, so everything is ready. Room 45. Just get the key at the front desk, and I'll meet you there at 8 o'clock. "Okay, got it." "I'll call you back later," he replied and ended the conversation. At the end of the conversation, the man couldn't help but smile. He quickly composed a text message with the details of the lovers' date, after which he collected his listening equipment and left the place of observation. Carlo looked at the message, and a grim smile appeared on his face. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he asked, with concern in his voice. "I have to ask before things go any further. You know where this is going to end up, don't you?" I looked at my friend, noticing the deep concern in his eyes and hearing the caution in his words. "Carlo," I began, my voice full of sincerity. "I love this woman as I have never loved and will never love. I gave her everything I had, and I can't just leave it. I have to do something so that she understands the severity of her act and understands that the consequences will last indefinitely. Together with her lover, I just have to. Carlo, you do understand, don't you?" Carlo nodded solemnly. "I understand, sir. We have a little time before the action starts, so let's have a snack. I'll tell you all the details." I was thinking of reaching out to Terry and Phil at some point, wanting to understand how much they knew and why they were hiding it from me, but Carlo dissuaded me, warning that if they became aware of my awareness, the police would receive evidence of the motives that preceded the incident. He convinced me that it was better to leave this topic alone for now, stressing that there would be time to solve it later, and asked me not to worry. We left the bar, and there I was introduced to Carlo's brother, Alfredo. He smiled warmly and shook my hand. "Glad to meet you, Al," he greeted warmly. "Hi," I replied. "My Uncle Carlo spoke very well of you. Glad to finally meet you." "I'm Alicia," Alfredo's daughter said, smiling affectionately at me. Alfredo took his daughter aside. "I apologize for my daughter's impulsive nature," he said. "They can be very assertive these days." I nodded understandingly. "Alfredo, I am very pleased to meet you and all your family members. We haven't been able to spend time together for too long. Family is everything, as I'm sure you know. Please give my regards to your wife and the rest of your family." Alfredo smiled and replied, "Thank you, sir. I will definitely tell them." A little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an incoming call signal was heard on the mobile phone. Looking at the screen, I saw that it was Connie. "Hi, Connie, what happened?" I replied. "I just called to make sure you got there safely, that's all. Is everything okay?" Connie's voice came on the line. "We're both fine, thanks for asking," I replied. "We're here, but we're just having a late lunch before continuing on our way. What do you have planned for the evening, my love?" I asked, hiding my true intentions behind a seemingly ordinary question. Still, I wanted to hear her lie again. "I'm going to visit Terry." "I think everything is fine there now," she replied. "That's nice to hear," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Actually, I was going to call Phil later. If I'm not mistaken, he's going out with his brother tonight. I've never had a chance to meet him. What is he like?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by an evasive, "Oh, well, I only met him once, but he seemed pretty nice to me," Connie replied vaguely. "I have to go, Connie. We need to check into the hotel before our evening meeting. I wish you a pleasant evening, and please say hello to Terry. Love you." "Bye, honey," I replied, ending the conversation. Carlo looked at me and felt the pain hidden in my expression. "Okay, sir. It's done. Let's go meet the guys," he said, offering support. Leaving Alfredo at the bar, we headed to the private rooms inside. I was introduced to a group of 4 people familiar with Carlo's work. "These are my very good friends," Carlo cordially introduced them to me. "I trust these people with my life, and I have done this countless times in the past." "They won't let you down," Carlo assured me. At that moment, his phone rang. He answered the call and nodded, passing the message to the others. "Okay, we're leaving in 5 minutes," he confirmed. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was already 8 o'clock. Time was rapidly slipping away. The men left the room and went to the waiting car. They picked up a minibus, which they used to get to their destination. At that time, Carlo and I went out the back door and got into the Mercedes that had been prepared for us. So, my story led me to the place where I am now. We parked the Mercedes on a quiet street just 200 meters from the hotel. We were sitting in silence. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening when a signal rang on Carlo's phone. He glanced at the message and nodded, confirming the arrival and placement of our team. We continued to sit in silence until another message popped up on Carlo's phone. "We are in place. The exit is guarded," the message read. "Okay, let's go," Carlo said, breaking the silence. After a moment, I followed suit, and we headed for the hotel lobby. Time seemed to have sped up. My heart was pounding with anticipation. Carlo got out of the car first and directed me to the number indicated. When we came to the door marked 415, I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife was standing behind it, infatuated with another man. Just as we reached the door, the other 4 men dressed in hotel-style uniforms seemed to appear out of thin air. I looked around the corridor and was relieved to find it empty. Carlo pointed out the presence of CCTV cameras, warning that we were nearby. Carlo took the lead and led the team into the bedroom. The lights came on, and a scene appeared before us from which my heart sank. From my seat, I could see my wife lying in bed with Tony, unaware of the impending invasion. It is difficult to tell the details of what happened to her lover in this context. Everything unfolded in a whirlwind of emotions. I turned on the light and entered the room. My gaze stopped on my wife lying on the bed. Her eyes met mine. She shuddered and tried to shield herself, tightly closing her eyes. Tears streamed down her face, and the words came out of her mouth in the form of muffled sobs and unintelligible mutterings. Love, hate, an influx of indescribable feelings overwhelmed me, and in the first place among them was rage. Carlo stepped forward, grabbed my arm tightly, and gently took the object out of my hand. His eyes, full of determination, met mine. He urged me to calm down and take control of my emotions. At this time, Connie was consumed with fear, her expression going from horror to shock as she looked at the 2 men standing in front of her. She began to shake her head vigorously, tears streaming down her face. Wide-eyed, she stared at the 2 imposing figures standing silently in front of her, and the lack of words only intensified the destruction of her evening. Feeling that it was time to leave, I noticed a barely noticeable movement of Carlo next to me. He was looking at his phone. "It's time for us to leave." I followed Carlo out of the room, leaving Connie on the bed. "You handled it well," Carlo remarked, breaking the silence as we walked back. "For a moment, I thought you might lose control of your anger." I laughed grimly in response. "No, so far it's just a good scare. The real lesson will be learned when she meets Tony again. There's no need to get your hands dirty, sir." "I'm sure the guys will deal with him properly," Carlo assured me. "I understand that it is important for you that he knows that you were there, but I have a feeling that he will not soon forget this experience." My gaze darted ahead gloomily as we made our way through the dimly lit streets, heading for our intended destination. When we entered the bar, Alfredo was already waiting for us. It was already closer to 1 o'clock in the morning, and he kindly poured us a generous drink. We sat down in silence, the heaviness of the past evening still hanging in the air. Carlo's phone beeped, announcing the arrival of a new message. He read it and smiled at me. "Everything is done and settled," he informed me. "The guys are on their way. I know that words will never be enough to express my gratitude for what they did today, but this night will always remain in my memory," I mused aloud. "That's enough," Carlo interrupted me decisively. "It's over now. You have to figure out the situation with her." I nodded, understanding his thought. No further words were needed. The gravity of the situation weighed on me, and I couldn't help but remember that we had left her at the hotel. I wondered how she would find her way home and what she would say about such an unexpected turn of events. Now she knew that I was fully aware of her actions, but would she admit to them, or would she remain silent despite the fact that I caught her in the act? I doubted that she would willingly confess. Carlo's words interrupted my train of thought. "Rooms are prepared for both of you when you are ready," he said, reminding me that there were still practical things to do. I couldn't sleep. I was going over the events of the previous night in my memory, thinking over every detail that led me to this moment. Thoughts of Connie filled my mind, and a heavy sadness settled in me. She was the love of my life, my everything. Now it's all been destroyed. There was only one way left, to meet her face to face and see how all this would happen between us. The divorce papers were already in my hands, and the official copy was supposed to be delivered to our house today. By the time I get back, she won't have any doubts about what I know. Suddenly, I had a chilling thought. What if she doesn't come home? The uncertainty dragged on, adding another layer of complexity to an already turbulent situation. Now that she knew it was me who caught her at the hotel, there was no doubt that Connie would be afraid to return home. I realized that I needed to take measures and reschedule the delivery of the divorce papers, possibly to Terry, where she could find refuge. I had a strong premonition that she would go there. Almost 7 hours had passed, and I was abruptly awakened from a restless sleep by Alicia. "It's lunchtime, sir." "You have 30 minutes, she informed me. "Carlo mentioned that you have to catch an afternoon flight, so it's time to get up. Your change of clothes is on the dresser." Patting me lightly on the shoulder, she left the room. I slowly moved myself to an upright position and began to get dressed, preparing for the upcoming challenges. When I looked in the mirror, a changed version of myself was looking at me. The face I thought I knew now bore the weight of recent events, and there were signs of change on it. Joining the others at the table, I felt that the feeling of normality had become surreal and at the same time strangely soothing. We ate together, talked, and even laughed, but time flew by too quickly, and soon it was time to leave. After collecting our things, we headed to the waiting car. As we drove away, I looked out the window, saying goodbye to the faces following us with their eyes. On the way home, I drove steadily and calmly. I dropped Carlo off, and Joanna greeted him with joy, hugging him tightly like newlyweds. Then she turned her attention to me and hugged me tightly, giving comfort in her embrace. "Everything will be fine. You have to understand that tomorrow will come for you. I know that everything will seem difficult for a while, but trust me, everything will be fine," Carlo reassured me. Hope flashed in his words. Even though I was speechless, I felt comforted when Carlo pulled me to him and hugged me tightly. Without losing hope for support, I began my journey home to meet my unfaithful wife. "Call me later," he said before we parted. I nodded, confirming our plan, and drove off, trying my best not to think about something empty. When I went to my front door and turned the key, an eerie silence reigned in the house. The heating turned on, and it became warm, but there was not enough cozy atmosphere. There were no sounds, no signs of life. With careful steps, I entered the living room, then headed to the kitchen, looking around wearily. The house was still empty and quiet. Glancing at my watch, I noted that it was already 6 o'clock in the evening, and Connie should have been home if she really cared about saving our marriage. I checked my mobile phone, but I didn't find any missed calls or messages from her. Overwhelmed with disappointment and sadness, I sank into a chair in the living room. A picture of Connie and me on the mantel caught my eye. I was seized with a surge of rage and grabbed the framed photo and threw it across the room. Just as it crashed against the wall, the phone rang, tearing the air with its shrill sound. With apprehension and curiosity, I answered, "Hello?" There was residual anger in my voice. "Oh, excuse me, is that?" a hesitant female voice asked on the other end of the line. "Yes, it's me. What do you need?" I replied, unwittingly making my tone harsh. The voice on the other end almost whispered, "It's me, Terry. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not at the right time. How can I help?" I took a slower breath, trying to regain my composure. "Well, it's about Connie," Terry began, her words full of concern. She is here with me, and she is very upset. I can't figure out what happened, but something is definitely wrong. She doesn't want to go home. She's afraid that you might do her some harm." I felt a mixture of emotions wash over me, but I knew that now was not the time for anger or revenge. "Terry, is she there with you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. "Yes, she's here," Terry confirmed. "Let her talk to me," I said firmly. "If she refuses, it will tell me something important, and I hope that it will affect you as well. Then ask her what happened." "Let's see what she says," I advised Terry, concern and curiosity sounding in my voice. As I listened, the mumbling on the other end of the line grew louder, indicating that there was a conversation going on. After a while, Terry returned to the conversation. "She's not saying anything," Terry confessed, his voice filled with genuine concern. "Be patient, Terry," I replied, trying to think as I walked. "Tell her I'll pick her up, let's see how she reacts." I heard Terry give my message to Connie, and suddenly her scream pierced the phone. That was the answer in itself. "Terry, I don't know what to tell you," Terry stammered, not knowing what to do. "Terry, I know." "You know," I replied, my voice sounding submissive. "I know everything. I know about the bachelorette parties and that you had a fight with Phil about it," I admitted, and there was sadness in my voice. "I'm sorry, Phil and I tried to convince them to stop, but to no avail. We found ourselves in a difficult situation." Terry's words came quickly as she was in a hurry to express her remorse for the situation. "Terry, please understand that I don't blame you or Phil for what Connie did to Tony. I'm just sad that you didn't tell me about it earlier. This undoubtedly affected our friendship, but I think it would be better if we don't talk about it anymore." There was silence on the other end, and then Terry whispered, "I understand." Once again, "I'm sorry." I took a deep breath, trying to find at least some semblance of completeness in this turmoil. "Thank you, Terry. Take care of yourself." I ended the conversation with this, admitting that our once strong friendship was irreparably changed by the actions of those who participated in it. "Please tell Connie I'm not coming for her so she can calm down, but her things will be packed and ready for her to pick them up. If she doesn't do it sooner rather than later, they will be disposed of. I mean everything," I instructed Terry harshly. "She doesn't live here anymore. Besides, some papers will be delivered for her today. I managed to redirect them to your address, as I had an assumption that she might try to hide with you. They should be arriving any minute, I suppose," I continued. "Please, I urge you to think carefully before taking any action, and especially before contacting me or anyone else," I stressed. "Understood, got it," Terry replied, her voice filled with understanding. "Okay, Terry," I replied, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. After I hung up the phone, I took a slow breath, trying to calm down in this turbulent situation. Fatigue seized me when I was sitting alone in an empty house. The last few days have drained me emotionally and physically. Although I knew that I would have to meet Connie later, at the moment, I felt too tired to enter into a conflict. But the fire inside me would soon flare up again, and forgiveness would be far from my thoughts. At that moment, a familiar voice broke the silence of my thoughts. "Hi, it's Carlo. Are you okay?" Carlo called unexpectedly early, but I appreciated his concern. He needed to make sure that I didn't succumb to any rash action. "I'm fine," I replied with a slight weariness in my voice. "My head really hurts." "Don't worry, I'm in control." Connie didn't come home. She went to Terry and Phil, I informed Carlo, expressing his relief and assuring me that he was always ready to support. We exchanged a few more words, after which the conversation was over. Sitting in the silence of the house, I became more and more determined to understand the situation, showing clarity and strength. I talked to Terry, outlined all the details, and made it clear that everything I know. I hadn't heard from her since about 7:30 p.m. I expected some kind of reaction after she was handed the documents, but according to Terry, she looked very nervous when she arrived at their house. Carlo grinned, apparently finding humor in the situation. Thinking about the day ahead, I mentally made a list of tasks that needed to be solved. First, I decided to contact my office and clarify work issues. Then it was necessary to negotiate with a locksmith, solve banking issues, and take care of logistics. Although it was painful for me to admit it, Although I didn't want to lose her, the trust that we once shared has completely disappeared. It was already impossible to stay in this relationship after the divorce papers were handed to her last night. I expected to hear from Connie today as soon as she gets her thoughts together, but it was already 9 when a knock interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the door, I saw Terry and Phil standing there. Their presence was unexpected. I watched them in silence, waiting for them to break the silence. Eventually, Terry spoke, and there was a note of remorse in her voice. "We should have come and apologized. It's the least we have to do to you," she said sincerely. "Can we come in and talk?" I stepped back and held the door open for them to enter, closing the door behind us. I gestured to the living room. They sat down together on the sofa, and I sat in the chair opposite them. The weight of unspoken words hung in the air, and we prepared for a much-needed conversation. "Okay, what did you guys want to discuss?" I asked, paying attention to Terry and philosophy. "We're both truly sorry," Phil began. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you that your wife is pursuing something else." "I'm sorry that I betrayed your trust as a friend," he said. "I'm sorry too," Terry chimed in, her voice full of remorse. "I'm sorry that I couldn't reach her, that she didn't want to listen to me. I don't understand what she was thinking. She's with us now, still doesn't understand anything. It looks like something terrible happened yesterday before her return." Their apologies hung in the air, and despite the fact that I felt offended and betrayed, I understood the sincerity of their words. It was a difficult situation, and although forgiveness was not immediate, I acknowledged their regret and attempt to express their remorse. "What do you mean, Terry?" I asked, feeling a mixture of confusion and concern. "All I know is that on Wednesday, I had to leave while the divorce papers were being prepared. I couldn't bear to even look at her, so I attended the meeting in Leeds. Then you called me. Are you saying that something happened between Connie and her lover, Tony?" "We don't know for sure," Phil replied, his tone filled with concern. "We haven't heard anything from my brother yet. I called him, but there was no answer. He's not in the apartment either. Connie can't give us any information either. She just said she felt tied up and that Tony had left her at the hotel." Listening to Phil's words, I felt an overwhelming anxiety. The situation seemed more complicated than I had initially imagined, and I couldn't figure out what could have happened between Connie and Tony. "Come on, Phil," I pressed, disappointment in my tone. "She should have said more than that. What happened?" "Obviously, something has happened. Did he do something to her?" Phil and Terry exchanged startled glances, amazed at the intensity of my anger. They rarely saw me in this state. Gathering my strength, I turned the conversation in another direction. "Anyway, aside from Tony, how's Connie doing?" "I believe she received the divorce papers last night," I asked. "Yes," Terry replied after a while. She seemed to calm down, but when she was handed the documents, it caused a new emotional outburst. She's in a confused and unbalanced state. Everything that happened affected her greatly. When she came to us, she was incredibly upset. My heart sank at the sight of Connie's deteriorating mental state. It became clear that something traumatic had happened that had put her in a state of confusion. Anger boiled up in me, but above all, fear gripped my heart when I thought about the unknown events because of which Connie was shocked and did not want to tell the details. "Well, guys, she did this to me, so if she's hurting now, then so be it," I replied, feeling angry. Terry and Phil stared at me, confused, shocked by the intensity of my anger directed at Connie. "True," Terry's voice cracked with excitement when she tried to reason with me. "Is there no way you can try to settle this with her? I mean, yes, she made a mistake, but you were so good together. Can't you at least try to save your relationship? Divorce is a serious step. Please talk to her first. Of course, she deserves it." I listened to Terry's plea, looking at the tears welling up in her eyes. My anger began to weaken, replaced by a mixture of conflicting emotions. The decision in front of me was weighty, and I realized that the way ahead would require careful consideration and open communication. Terry, showing sincere concern, showed the emotions of a true friend. When I paused, avoiding her gaze, I couldn't help but realize that deep down, I had always liked Terry. Similarly, I couldn't completely dismiss Phil despite their involvement in this confusing situation. Terry's words rang true, demanding a serious approach from me. Deep down, I knew that sooner or later, I would have to face Connie. Taking a deep breath, I finally made a decision. All right, Terry, I agreed. I will talk to her, but only after all her things have been taken out of our house. It's just her and me. I will call her and tell her in detail when and where this conversation will take place. How do you like this option? In response to my decision, Terry quickly came up to me and hugged me tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. I saw Phil looking at this, and his expression was confused and regretful. That's all we can ask for, and maybe even more than she could have expected, I admitted, grateful to Terry for understanding. Thank you, Terry. I will contact her soon. Please tell her to wait for my call, and don't worry, I won't leave her in limbo for long. Phil just looked at me, expressing his regret. I'm sorry, he muttered, and there was a note of sympathy in his voice. My brother certainly deserved a good, proper thrashing from you. I wouldn't blame you a bit if you did. Watching from the window as Terry and Phil left, their hasty departure indicating their goal, my future ex-wife, I sat and thought. I thought about Terry's words and realized that there was some truth in them. I needed to talk to Connie, and this conversation could not be postponed any longer. Feeling detached from the current situation, I found solace in communicating with my longtime friend, Sadie. Our conversation lasted for half an hour, during which I listened attentively as Sadie talked about her successful life endeavors without my presence. She really was an extraordinary woman. But when she delved into Connie's topic, she changed her tone, taking on the role of a mother. It was like listening to my own mother's lectures. In the end, Sadie insisted that I have dinner at her house tonight with her husband. Feeling somewhat obligated, I reluctantly agreed to her demand. The rest of the day was spent in various changes. Locks were changed, bedrooms were rearranged, clothes were packed or thrown away, photos were rearranged or destroyed. Each action symbolized moving forward and parting with what had been. As evening approached, I sat by the window, lost in thought and looking at the world around me, realizing the task ahead. I knew I had to gather my strength and call, but feeling tired, I decided to postpone it until the morning. Another restless night followed, giving no respite from anxious thoughts. Early in the morning, shortly before 7:30, an unexpected call broke the silence. "Hi, it's me, Phil," came a voice on the other end of the line. "Listen, I just got a call from the hospital. My brother has been there for several days. He was injured somehow, but fortunately, his condition is stable. I don't have any more details right now. That's all I know." The news of Tony's condition had little effect on my emotions. A cold detachment filled my response. "I hope you don't expect sympathy from me, Phil," I replied in a voice devoid of compassion. "As far as I understand, he was lucky that our paths did not cross. I don't have the slightest desire to show him any respect." "I understand," Phil replied, seeming to accept the frankness of my words. "I'm not going to ask this question because I won't blame you if you do," Phil said frankly, acknowledging the justified anger I felt towards Tony. "He got what he deserved. You're a great guy and a true friend, and I'm really sorry that I wasn't as good a friend to you as you were to me. I know I can't fix what's been done, but I thought you should know about Tony." "Phil, it's not your fault. Please remember this," I reassured him, realizing that he sincerely repented. "So the circumstances have developed. We can't change the past. Give my love to Terry. Goodbye and thank you for informing me about this." "Of course, goodbye," Phil replied and hung up. I carefully put the phone back on the stand and turned my attention to the view outside the window. I was looking at the garden, enjoying the silence and thinking about the events that had happened. A calm atmosphere enveloped me as I watched random birds flying to the feeder and feasting on the seeds with which I was happy to supply them. Watching the serene communion with nature through glass had always caused me a sense of calm. It was at such moments, immersed in the beauty of the natural world, that my thoughts could flow freely. Taking out my mobile phone, I dialed Carlo's number to share the news about Tony. His response was laconic but filled with a sense of satisfaction. He noted that the work was done well. Putting the phone aside, I took a sip of the coffee I was holding in my hand, enjoying the aromas of the day. Soon, the phone rang again, interrupting the peaceful atmosphere. This time, I decided to send the phone to the answering machine. Listening carefully, I heard Connie's trembling voice leaving a message in which her words sounded uncertain and emotional. "I'm sorry, but I have to explain. I need you. I need to get home." "I'm so sorry," Connie's desperate plea echoed in the voicemail. Sobs interrupted her words, penetrating into my soul and making my heart ache in my chest. Each tearful phrase caused a shockwave of emotions in me, which took my breath away. When the message ended, I felt that I was breathing heavily, and contradictory thoughts were spinning in my head. I knew that today I would have to solve this situation, but I wanted her to wait so that she would understand that my decision was made not only in response to her message. It had to be a carefully thought-out decision. For the next few hours, I wandered aimlessly around the house, lost in deep thought. The once familiar rooms now seemed empty, emphasizing the emptiness that had formed after Connie's absence. In place of her belongings, there were voids that served as a visual reminder of our life together. I contacted Sadie and asked for help from several people with a van to move all of Connie's things. Within an hour, the boxes and bags I packed were neatly loaded into the back of the van. I watched the car pull away, setting off to return Connie's things. Soon, I was expecting my phone to buzz with a notification about the delivery of things. This meant the final completion of the one-way trip. It was the last stage of our life together. The phone rang again, this time with Terry on the other end. "We got Connie's stuff," she informed me. "I just wanted to let you know that we accepted them. The guys obviously brought most of the things to the warehouse." "Thanks for organizing this," I replied briefly to her gratitude, feeling a sense of completeness come over me. "We only have the things that you marked as personal," Terry said, providing an update on Connie's belongings. "I know she called you earlier. Will you talk to her now or later?" she inquired. "Call her, Terry," I replied firmly, ready to enter into a conflict with Connie and bring this conversation to an inevitable end. I waited patiently until I heard her voice on the line. "Hello, Connie," I greeted her, my tone firm and at the same time restrained. "Oh, I'm sorry," Connie's voice trembled with remorse. "You didn't even think about getting caught, did you?" I intervened, interrupting her attempt to apologize. "Leave it alone, Connie. Now you have the answers to all the questions that you never bothered to ask yourself while you were busy with other things. Can we?" she began again, her voice sounding pleading. "No, Connie," I interrupted, my voice firm. "We have nothing more to discuss. This is where our journey ends. Do you really think you can tell me anything that will help me deal with this?" There was a desperate plea in Connie's voice. "Can I come home and talk to you, please?" Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself to listen to her, even though I couldn't bring myself to make any promises. "I'll listen," I replied with fatigue in my voice, "but I can't promise anything." With that, I ended the conversation, leaving the weight of her words in my memory. There was pain in her voice, and I couldn't help but wonder if she could feel the suffering in my voice. Leaning back in my chair, I thought about our marriage, about the happiness that I thought we shared, and yet, a doubt crept in. How well did I know her? Were my assumptions about our relationship too idealistic? Plunging into introspection, I hardly realized that perhaps I still have a lot to learn about the person I thought I knew so intimately. Although I didn't suspect anything until that fateful night, it dawned on me that this doesn't mean Connie hasn't engaged in similar behavior before. Taking a deep breath, I decided to approach the upcoming meeting with restrained emotions, mentally preparing for what is likely to be the last act of our marriage. The doorbell echoed through the house, announcing Connie's arrival. I nervously opened the door, and at the sight of her, time seemed to stop. It was the first meeting with her after that solemn night at the hotel. The shock of that moment resonated in me. When she entered the living room and looked around, I couldn't help but notice how a thin sigh escaped from her lips, which was replaced by a strangled sob. She drew attention to the empty spaces on the walls, devoid of photos and cherished souvenirs that once adorned our life together. She was standing in front of me, covering her mouth with her hand, tears in her eyes. "It's all gone," I stated coldly, bitterness sounding in my voice. "If you look around the rest of the house, you'll see that there are a lot of empty seats." "I don't understand," she pleaded, her voice shaking with remorse. "I know," I replied, my tone remaining icy, "but this is a consequence of your actions, your infidelity, extramarital affair, connection with another man. It's all on your conscience. I hope that this will satisfy the void that you have been trying to fill." There was silence, and Connie sat down on the sofa with a stern expression on my face. I continued, "All right, Connie, let's hear it. What do you have to say for yourself?" "I'm sorry," she murmured, regret in her voice. I couldn't resist. It's become something of an addiction. I sat there, struggling with the emotions that flooded over me and wondering if there was still room in my heart for forgiveness. "Connie, just so you know, I talked to Terry and Phil," I began, my voice filled with a mixture of knowledge and frustration. "Now they have eliminated the gaps in my understanding. Now I know what happened, where it happened, and even who it happened to. But I still don't understand why." She shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her feet. "I can't answer that question. He was just new and exciting," she admitted softly, "but the fact remains that you slept with him," I argued, unable to hide my resentment and disappointment. Not once or twice, but constantly for several weeks, Connie continued to avoid eye contact. Her guilt was obvious. "I know I can't justify what I did. I was completely wrong. But can we find a way to forget about it?" Not wanting to answer her question directly, I turned the conversation in another direction. "And what happened to your lover? Where is he?" Connie's reaction was swift, her denial palpable. "Please don't call him that. He's not my lover. Yes, I know I went on dates with him, but I want you to understand that I don't have any real feelings for him," Connie pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you and only you. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry," she said. I listened to her words, anger boiling in the depths of my soul. "You say you love me, and you've been dating him for weeks. How can I trust your words or believe that you really love me?" "You have proved that you are a lying creature," I replied, unable to hide the pain and betrayal in my voice. "Why should I spend more time with you or believe at least one of your words? Tell me, Connie." Tears continued to flow as she began to realize the full force of my anger at her. It was a moment of awakening for her when she finally began to realize the full depth of the consequences of her actions. She trembled, realizing that our relationship was hanging by a thread. "What about you?" I demanded, my voice harsh. "Did you communicate with your lover since then?" The weight of the question hung in the air, waiting for her answer. Connie spoke through tearful eyes, her voice choked with grief. "I haven't heard anything about him at all. All I know is that he's in the hospital somewhere. That's all Phil said. But I don't want to hear anything about him. He ruined my life," she said. A bitter laugh escaped my lips at these words as she looked around the living room for a change of subject. Her eyes widened with realization our wedding photo was missing from the fireplace. She got up and began to walk around the room, noting every empty place where memories were once stored. I watched in silence as she absorbed the absence, the emptiness that now permeated our house. Emotionally exhausted, Connie sank down on the sofa, and her despair became obvious. The gravity of the situation weighed on both of us, and the silence in the room reflected the huge gap that now lay between us. "It's all gone. Is there really no chance?" Connie pleaded. There was a note of defeat in her voice, but there was still hope in her eyes. Taking a deep breath, I met her gaze, my own expression a mix of suffering and resilience. "Connie, I loved you with every fiber of my being. But what you did broke my heart and trampled on it. Being with him was not just a betrayal, it was disrespect and complete disregard for my feelings and the feelings of our friends. You openly continued your relationship with him, even in public. Now you have to answer for the consequences. Your lover has already begun to pay for his actions." I paused, feeling the weight of my decision and finality hanging in the air. "Connie, our marriage is over. Now, excuse me." With that, I turned away, leaving Connie to deal with the consequences of her choice. "I haven't heard anything from you, so if you sign the divorce papers, we can both move on." "I don't want to see or hear you anymore," I said firmly, finality and fatigue sounding in my voice. "Everything ends with you now. It's time for you to leave my house, and remember, you won't be able to live in peace in this city. You know what a big family I have and what kind of connections we have. So, if you want to live in peace and not look around coming home late at night, leave this city and leave the country." She sat in utter dejection, absorbing the weight of my words. Gathering her strength, she slowly got to her feet, preparing to leave. I followed her to the door, silently watching her open the door of her car. When she looked back at me, saying the word "I'm sorry," mixed emotions stirred in me. A moment later, she hurriedly got into the car, and I closed the door, thereby closing not only her exit but also the end of our marriage. 2 days later, Carlo informed me that Connie had left the country on the same day, taking only the necessary things with her. Carlo's people made sure that my unfaithful wife got on a plane and flew away. Apparently, Connie realized how harsh I could be and that I would not give her a quiet life.